Cute little ceremony. Somebody should have told you people this isn't that kind of neighborhood. Corinne Blakely didn't hand the notice to Deacon Vaughn. She reached past him and tucked it into his wife's bouquet, then wiped her hand on her sleeve. 41 cars, gone in 38 minutes, hauled off Deacon's own land while he stood under the arch, saying his vows to an impound lot 26 miles outside the county. $825 a car. 6 tow trucks, 2 guards, 1 woman in a white suit who was certain she'd won. Deacon never raised his voice. He read down the impound list, stopped on a black Suburban that belonged to no guest, and made a 9-second phone call. Corinne got in her SUV to leave. She never made it past the gate, and she still doesn't know which car she should have left alone. HOA Creek Estates sits about 9 miles outside town, past the water tower, where the county road stops pretending to be a highway and starts pretending to be a driveway. 86 houses, uniform mailboxes, lawns that look like somebody irons them. It's the kind of place where the asphalt is so smooth you can hear your own tires go quiet. Deacon Vaughn's property is at the far eastern end, and you know the second you hit it because the asphalt stops and the gravel starts. And gravel has a sound to it, that crunch under the tires. That's the property line, and it's older than the neighborhood. His parcel was deeded in 1974 as agricultural acreage, 9.4 acres, a hay barn, a well, and a stand of pin oaks that were there when Nixon resigned. HOA Creek Estates didn't exist until 1998, and when the developer filed the Declaration of Covenants, Deacon's parcel wasn't in it. It was never annexed. Not by accident either. The old man who owned it then said no in writing, and the developer had a build schedule and no patience, so he shrugged and drew the boundary around him. Which means that for 27 years there has been a 9-acre hole in the middle of somebody's authority. That hole is the whole story. Deacon bought the place at 34. He liked the barn. He liked that the nearest streetlight was 400 feet away and pointed somewhere else. Most mornings in summer you'd find him out there before 7 with the old orange mower, and the whole east end of the neighborhood would smell like diesel and cut hay by 8. Nobody complained. A few people said it was the best thing about living down that end. He was quiet. He waved. He reset the Hendersons' fence posts after the ice storm and wouldn't take money for it. Kids cut across his fence line to get to the creek, and he never once ran them off. He just moved the barbed wire and put in a gate so they'd stop tearing their jeans. Nobody ever asked what he did for work. He'd say, government, and people would nod like that explained something and go back to talking about the water bill. 9 years and not one soul in HOA Creek Estates ever pushed past that word. Then there was Corinne Blakely, president of the HOA Creek Homeowners Association, 9 years running. Unopposed every single one of them because when the ballots went out, she was also the one counting them. She had a clipboard she carried like a badge, and a badge she wore on a lanyard like a commission. She had opinions about mailbox height. She had a laminated card in her purse with the covenant sections she used most, which tells you everything, because there were only 4 of them, and she'd worn the edges soft. And she had a way of talking to Deacon that other people noticed before he ever said a word about it. It was never anything you could put in a complaint. It was back there. It was your people. It was the way she said his address like it was a rumor. She'd stand in his driveway and talk to him about property values while looking past him at his barn, and there was always a half-second where you could see her decide to say the thing anyway. The first fine came in his second summer. $400, non-conforming outbuilding, unapproved exterior structure. The outbuilding in question was a hay barn built in 1974, 24 years before her association drew its first breath. Deacon didn't call anybody. He drove to the county recorder's office, paid $9 for a certified copy of the plat, took a red pen, traced his boundary, and mailed it back certified. One line clipped to the front. Your covenants stop at the stake. That became the pattern. A fine for a fence line entirely on his own side. A fine for a plain gray sedan in his own driveway, commercial in appearance, no markings on it anywhere. A fine for a flagpole she couldn't cite a rule against when he asked her to. Every time, same plat, same red line, same sentence. No lawyer, no shouting, no email he'd regret. And here's the part that ate at her: he never fought. Fighting she could work with. Fighting goes in the minutes. A man who just says no politely and mails you a map gives you absolutely nothing to escalate. But there was something underneath all of it, and it took Deacon a long time to see the shape of it. 6 times in 6 years, Corinne asked him for an access road across his field to the retention pond. Sometimes it was framed as an emergency route, sometimes as a maintenance easement, once generously as a favor to the community. 6 times he said no. He liked his field. He didn't want a gravel scar through the middle of it so somebody could save 4 minutes. She kept asking, though, long after a normal person would have quit. Then Simone Ferris came along. Hospice nurse 12 years, in the kind of steady you can't fake. They met at a fundraiser where the DJ was terrible and neither of them left. Engaged in April. And when the question came up about where to do it, Simone looked out at his field with the pin oaks along the back and said she didn't want a ballroom, she wanted grass under her shoes. 70 guests. No kids. A tent, folding tables, a modest catering setup, and a parking area mowed into the field, all of it on his own land, none of it touching an inch of anything Harrow Creek owned. Corinne heard about it within a week. Somebody always tells her. 3 weeks out, she came up his gravel lane and left him with a sentence he didn't take seriously enough at the time. "You'll regret embarrassing this board." She'd said versions of that for years. This time she'd already made the arrangements. She showed up dressed for a hearing. That's the detail Deacon remembered later. Not the clipboard, not the tone, but the fact that a woman came to a man's driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, in a suit jacket, on a day it was 91 degrees. Her heels didn't work in his gravel. She had to walk the way you walk on ice. He watched her cross 40 feet of driveway and thought, not unkindly, that she could have just parked on the grass. "You're aware," she said, "that any gathering over 25 people inside Harrow Creek requires board approval and a community event assessment." I wasn't. $9,400. She said the number the way people recite scripture, from memory, without blinking, like it had been carved into something. There was rain coming. You could smell it. That flat mineral smell off the pavement before it gets there. And Deacon took his time. He went inside, came back with the plat and unfolded it across the hood of her Lexus. She didn't stop him, which was a mistake. He traced the eastern boundary with his finger. The recorded legal description. The exhibit attached to her own declaration of covenants, the one that lists every lot the association actually governs. His parcel isn't on it. Not as an exception, not as a footnote. It simply isn't there. "Then it's a good thing my wedding isn't in Harrow Creek," he said. She looked at the map for a long moment. And then she did what people do when they've run out of authority. She got louder. "The rule applies to every resident, without exception." "Okay," Deacon said. "Put it in writing." That stopped her. "On letterhead," he said, "with the section number, just the number. I'll pay it today if you can cite it." She didn't. She stood there in the heat with her jaw working. And then she got in her car and backed down his lane fast enough to throw gravel. Deacon went inside, opened a spiral notebook he kept in the kitchen drawer, and wrote the date, the time, the amount, and one sentence, declined to cite authority in writing. Here's the thing most people don't know, and it costs them thousands of dollars a year. An HOA's power isn't in the president. It isn't in the clipboard, the lanyard, or the tone of voice. It lives in one document, the recorded declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and in the legal description exhibit attached to it that lists exactly which parcels are bound. That document is public. It's sitting at your county recorder's office right now, and a certified copy usually costs less than a tank of gas. If your address isn't in the exhibit, no amount of confidence changes that. The takeaway, if a rule can't be pointed to on paper, it isn't a rule, it's an opinion with good posture. 6 days later, Corinne called an emergency board meeting. She told 5 other adults with a straight face that Deacon Vaughn's wedding presented traffic congestion, excessive noise, a measurable decline in property values, and a security concern. She used that last phrase twice and never once explained what it meant. Deacon heard about it later from 3 different people, all of whom described the same silence in the room afterward. Roland Pettigrew broke it. Roland is the vice president, 71 years old, retired county building inspector, 31 years of reading plats for a living. He is congenitally incapable of pretending a boundary is somewhere it isn't. He asked her plainly what jurisdiction the board actually held over a parcel that had never been annexed. Corinne looked at him and said 2 words: road access. And then she let it sit there, the way people do when they want a sentence to sound like a legal argument instead of a guess. Her position, as far as anyone could follow it, was that some wedding guests would drive on the shared community road for approximately 90 seconds before turning onto Deacon's private lane, and that 90 seconds gave the Harrow Creek Homeowners Association dominion over the entire event. Roland asked whether she was proposing the board could regulate anything a resident did after driving on a road. She said he was being deliberately difficult. The motion to impose the assessment failed 4-3. It should have been 6-1, but 2 board members had contracts they liked and didn't want to be on the wrong side of the woman who signed them. That detail matters later. What matters now is what Corinne learned that night: the board was not going to be useful, so she stopped using it. Deacon didn't know that yet. He spent that week doing what grooms do, arguing about seating charts, agreeing to a cake he had no opinion on, and getting a call from Simone's grandmother, Miss Verley Ferris, 83 years old, informing him, rather than asking him, that she'd be driving up from Beaumont. The signs went up on a Thursday overnight. Deacon found them at 5:40 in the morning, which is when the Harrow Creek sprinkler system kicks on and the whole neighborhood starts hissing like a snake pit. Fresh signposts, driven deep sawdust, still bright in the wet grass. 6 of them along the shared road. Private community, annexed at owner expense. 2 of them were on his frontage. He stood there in the dark with a cup of coffee and measured. Not paste measured, with a 25-foot tape from the capped pin at his corner. 11 feet 3 inches inside his line. Both of them. Now a normal man pulls those signs, pulls them, throws them in the truck bed, drives them to the clubhouse, and leaves them leaning against the door with a note. That's the satisfying version. Deacon left them standing. He went and got his camera and photographed each one with the tape measure stretched from the survey pin into the frame, so the distance was in the picture and not just in his memory. He photographed the post, the sawdust, the timestamp. Then he called the county at 8, asked whether any sign permit had been issued to Harrow Creek Estates in the last 90 days, and was told no. He filed a written notice of encroachment and mailed a copy certified, and then he went inside and had breakfast. Evidence looks better upright. The signs stayed for 11 days. In every single photograph taken at that wedding, from the north side of the tent, there is a sign in the background that says vehicles will be towed, planted 11 feet 3 inches onto the property of the man whose vehicles got towed. That's the second thing worth knowing. In most states, before a vehicle can legally be hauled off private property, 3 things have to line up: compliant posted signage that meets statutory size and placement rules, and a tow authorization signed by the actual owner of the land or their agent, and in a lot of jurisdictions, a call to the sheriff's department within a set window after the tow. Miss any one of those and it stops being enforcement. It becomes conversion, which is the legal word for taking something that isn't yours. The takeaway: whoever signs the tow order owns everything that happens next. Corinne signed hers 8 days later. The rehearsal dinner was the following Friday in the field under the tent, because Simone wanted to see the space full of people once before it mattered. 40-some folks barbecue, string lights, the smell of oak smoke, and somebody's citronella candle fighting a losing war with the mosquitoes. Around 8:30, Otis Ambrose, best man, Deacon's oldest friend, a man built like a chest freezer, noticed somebody walking the fence line. Harrow Creek contracted a security patrol. 2 guys, a white pickup mostly. They drove around at 11 and made sure nobody was skateboarding. This wasn't that. This was one man on foot at the fence, holding a clipboard and a phone, walking slowly down the row of parked cars, photographing plates. Otis went out there. The man said it was a routine patrol, said it pleasantly, and left. Otis came back and told Deacon, and Deacon said thank you, and went and refilled the ice. But at 11 that night, after everybody had cleared out, Deacon walked back down to the fence by himself. He stood there in the dark and looked at the empty field where 41 cars would be sitting the next afternoon. String lights still up, tables still out, the grass flattened in neat rows where the tires had been. And he understood exactly what a list of license plates is for. You collect plates for one reason. You collect them because you intend to take the cars, and you want to know in advance which ones and where, so that when the time comes you don't have to think, you just have to work fast. He could have canceled. He could have moved the whole thing to a hotel ballroom in town and eaten the deposit and been done with it. He went back up to the house, got out the notebook, and started writing down what he'd need. 3 days out, she came at him sideways. The tent vendor called first from a truck cab somewhere hot. Deacon could hear the vinyl creaking and the cicadas going off in the background. A woman from the Homeowners Association had contacted them about an unpermitted commercial event and potential liability exposure. Nothing threatening, just enough to make a small business owner nervous. The caterer got the same call an hour later. And then somebody changed the code on the Harrow Creek front gate. No notice, no email, no posting, just changed it 3 days before 70 people needed to drive through it. Deacon spent 40 minutes on the phone with the county that afternoon and got something better than an argument. He got a letter, written confirmation on county letterhead that a private gathering of that size on agricultural zoned private property required no special event permit beyond the standard noise ordinance, which ends at 10 p.m., which was fine because Simone's family cannot stay awake past 9:30 anyway. He forwarded it to both vendors and copied the county clerk. Both vendors stayed. Then he did the quiet part. At the back of his parcel, running along the eastern edge, there's an old service road, gravel county right-of-way, a busted cattle guard, and a farm gate that hadn't been opened since the previous owner died. It connects to the county road half a mile down. It touches Deacon's land directly. It has never had one single thing to do with Harrow Creek Estates. He spent a Saturday out there with a chainsaw and a can of penetrating oil, cut back the honeysuckle, dragged out 2 rotten fence posts, and greased hinges that hadn't moved in a decade. By evening, the gate swung clean. He printed new directions for the invitation cards and mailed them out. 27 years of covenants, 400 pages of landscaping standards, a gate code changed in the dark, and the one road she couldn't touch was the gravel one with the busted cattle guard. Then Miss Verley called. She was bringing the Cadillac. Her husband bought that car new. A 1969 Fleetwood, factory black. The kind of car that takes up a whole lane and doesn't apologize. He drove it for 31 years. He'd been gone 11 and she'd kept it running the whole time, out of what Deacon suspected was pure stubbornness. Simone was going to ride to the arch in it. She'd already cried about it twice on the phone. Deacon walked the parking field the next morning and thought about where to put it. He picked the shaded end, up near the road under the oaks, away from the tent, where nobody would back into it. Closest to the gate, closest to the road. He'd spend a long time thinking about that decision. Roland Pettigrew called him at 10 that night. Deacon knew something was wrong from the first syllable, because Roland is a man who says hello like a receipt, and this time he didn't say hello at all. "Can you come over? Bring your own coffee. Mine's been on since 4. Roland's kitchen table had a folder on it. Not a stack of folder, tabbed with the tabs labeled in draftsman's block capitals, because 31 years of county inspection work does that to a person's handwriting. He'd been building it for 5 weeks, ever since a resident asked him a simple question about a landscaping invoice, and he couldn't answer it. The first tab was money. Every towing invoice, security patrol contract, landscaping agreement, and something called a compliance consulting fee for the past 2 years. None of them paid to a vendor. All of them paid to or routed through an entity called Blakely Property Compliance, LLC. Roland had pulled the state business registry that morning. It took him 4 minutes and cost nothing. Registered agent Corinne Blakely, principal address her house on Marchmont Court, formed 26 months earlier, never disclosed to the board, never voted on, never mentioned. Which meant that for 2 years, every neighbor who'd paid a fine for a trash can left out, every homeowner who'd paid a compliance review fee to get their fence approved had been handing a percentage to the woman who wrote the violation. That was bad. That was the kind of bad that ends a presidency. The second tab was worse. It was a letter of intent. 2 pages dated in March between Corinne Blakely signing on behalf of the association, which she had no authority to do alone, and a development group called Marrowbone Ridge. Marrowbone Ridge had bought 60 acres directly east of Harrow Creek. 60 lots planned. Financing conditionally approved. One problem, and it was the kind of problem that kills a subdivision: the parcel was landlocked. The county wouldn't approve the plat without a second emergency access route, and there was exactly one viable path: straight through Deacon Vaughn's field. The letter of intent committed the association to delivering an easement across that field. There was a fee schedule attached, payable to the association, and a second-line item, a consulting fee, payable to Blakely Property Compliance, LLC. And there was a deadline: September 30th. Deliver the easement by then, or Marrowbone Ridge walked and the whole arrangement evaporated. Deacon sat in Roland's kitchen and felt the entire last 6 years reorganize itself in his head. The fine for the barn, the fine for the fence, the gray sedan, the flagpole, the 6 requests for an access road spaced out over 6 years, always framed as a favor. None of it was about lawns. None of it was about noise or property values or the mailbox height. It had never been petty at all. It had only ever looked petty. He was being squeezed. Slowly, cheaply, one $400 fine at a time, by a woman who had already sold a road she didn't own and was running out of month to deliver it. Which is worth stopping on for a second, because this is the part most people never think to check. LLC ownership is public information. Every state has a business registry you can search from your phone, free in about 4 minutes, and it will tell you exactly who's behind a vendor name. And in most states, HOA statutes give any member the right to demand the association's books, contracts, and vendor invoices in writing, with a deadline the board has to meet. Roland didn't do anything clever. He just asked in writing, and then he read what came back. The takeaway: money always leaves a paper trail, even when the people moving it don't. Deacon drove home at midnight and didn't feel angry. He'd expected to. What he felt was closer to arithmetic, because a deadline changes everything. A person with unlimited time can nibble at you forever. A person with 18 days left has to do something big and public and soon. She was going to move at the wedding. He was almost sure of it. He just didn't know yet how far she'd go. Here's what Deacon Vaughn decided, sitting in his truck in his own driveway at midnight, 18 days out. He wasn't going to stop the tow. He was going to make sure that if it happened, there was no version of the story where anybody could pretend it was a misunderstanding. That's the whole trap. It isn't a spike strip. It isn't a chain across the road. It's a field with no ambiguity left in it. He started with the boundary. 2 days before the wedding, a licensed county surveyor spent 5 hours walking his line, driving fresh-capped iron pins every 50 feet with bright orange whiskers zip-tied to the tops so you could see them from 100 yards. Cost him $1,200. Then the surveyor filed a signed boundary affidavit at the courthouse, stamped and recorded on a Wednesday. That single piece of paper meant nobody standing in that field on Saturday would ever be able to say they didn't know where the line was. Not the tow driver, not the guards, not her. Then the eyes. 4 weatherproof cameras, barn eave, arch pole, gate post, mailbox, recording continuously with timestamps to a drive in the house, and more importantly, to an off-site backup, because Deacon had been doing this long enough to know that the first thing that goes missing is the recording. He tested every angle twice. And then there was Sawyer Delacroix, 16 years old, 3 houses down, who'd been flying a drone over Harrow Creek all summer and driving Corinne Blakely slowly out of her mind. Deacon paid him $40 and promised him a plate of ribs to fly slow orbits over the property from 3:45 onward. For the wedding footage, kid nearly levitated. Then he posted his own signs. Not angry ones. Compliant ones meeting the county's size and placement standards at the field entrance and at both approaches private property parking, by permission of the owner, no towing authorized by any party other than the property owner, with his name and phone number and the date. He photographed them, had the photographs notarized, and mailed a certified copy to the Harrow Creek Homeowners Association, care of its president. She signed for it. There's a green card with her signature on it. He told Sheriff Odell Rankin over coffee at the diner that there might be some confusion about property lines at his place on Saturday, and handed him a copy of the plat and the new boundary affidavit. Rankin looked at it for about 9 seconds, said, "I remember this parcel," and put it in his glove box. He told Otis one thing and one thing only: if trucks come, film it. Don't touch anybody, Don't block anybody. Film it. Roland kept his folder closed. That was the agreement. Not yet. And then there was the thing Deacon did not plan, did not arrange, and did not think about twice. Nash Corrigan was coming. 22 years of working together, and Nash was driving up straight off an assignment 2 states over, arriving sometime that afternoon, still in the government fleet vehicle he'd been in all week. A black Suburban with a federal plate and a GSA asset tag on the doorframe. Nash asked where to park it. Deacon said what he'd have said to anybody, wherever there's room. That's it. That's the whole conversation. He never touched that vehicle, never moved it, never mentioned it again. Later, more than one person would ask whether he'd set it up, and the honest answer was no. He'd built a field where the truth was impossible to argue with. He simply had no idea how much truth was going to show up. 2 nights before, Simone asked him if they should just move it. A hotel in town, somebody's ballroom, away from all of it. Deacon thought about it longer than she expected. If we move, he said, she wins quiet, and nobody ever knows what she did. If we stay, she loses loud. Simone looked at him for a while, and then said okay, and went to bed. The night before, he walked the field one last time. 41 parking spaces mowed in neat rows, string lights up, tent white in the dark, and every 50 feet along the boundary, an orange survey whisker moving a little in the wind. A line of small, bright flags all the way out to the road. Corinne had 11 days, then 8, then 5. She got loud. The flyers went out on a Tuesday. 200 of them, photocopied, folded once, wedged indoors, not mailboxes, because that's a federal offense, and she knew that much. Know your neighbor, across the top. A grainy photograph of Deacon's barn taken from the road. A paragraph about an unpermitted commercial event operating out of the East Parcel, about liability, about the kind of traffic this brings into our community. Deacon found his on the porch rail at 6 a.m. It was still warm. Toner has a smell dry and faintly electric, and it had been run off somewhere within the last hour or 2. Simone read it standing in the kitchen in his shirt. She read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully along the existing crease and set it on the counter and said, "Put that with the rest." That's exactly what he did. Flyer the envelope one neighbor had gotten hers in the postmark, and the names of 4 residents who'd say on the record who handed theirs over. 2 days later, his office received an anonymous complaint. Typed, unsigned, mailed. It alleged that Deacon Vaughn was using a federal position to intimidate a volunteer homeowners association board. Of everything Corinne Blakely did in those 18 days, that was the worst decision, and she never understood why. Because Deacon didn't hide from it. He walked into his supervisor's office the same day, laid it on the desk, and self-reported in writing the ongoing dispute. The easement demands, the fines, the flyer, all of it, dated before anybody asked him a single question. Requested the matter be documented and reviewed. That converted an accusation into a paper trail with her fingerprints on the timeline. Nothing terrifies a person operating in bad faith like somebody who answers everything in writing and keeps the receipt. Then came the affidavit. Roland found it. A sworn statement from a concerned resident attesting that vehicles at the East Parcel created an emergency obstruction requiring immediate removal for public safety. It was signed and notarized 6 days before the wedding. 6 days before a single car parked in that field. A man swore under oath to an obstruction that did not exist yet and could not exist yet, and Corinne filed it in the association's records like a receipt she was planning to need. And on Thursday, Bellwether Towing and Recovery signed a contract for Saturday afternoon. Roland got a copy through a written records request and called Deacon at 9 that night with his voice flat. Page 3. A referral clause. 22% of every impound fee payable to Blakely Property Compliance, LLC. Retrieval fee, $825 per vehicle. Impound lot 26 miles out across the county line, chosen for exactly that reason. Deacon was at the kitchen table, with the seating chart in front of him. He turned it over and did the math on the back. $825 times 22% is $181.50. Per car. 41 cars in that field. $7,441.50 into her personal LLC in one afternoon for a wedding she had no authority over. He circled the number, put the pen down, and didn't say anything at all. At 4 in the morning on the day of the wedding, Deacon heard a diesel engine where no diesel engine belonged. He'd been half awake anyway. He pulled on boots and walked down the eastern edge of the property in the dark, with a flashlight he didn't turn on, and about 600 feet along, he found a skid loader setting concrete barriers across the old service road. 3 of them, right at the mouth of the gravel, where the county right-of-way met the county road. 2 men in Harrow Creek maintenance vests, working under headlights, scraping the bucket along the gravel. That grinding sound carries about a mile at 4 a.m. The road they were blocking was not HOA property. It never had been. It was a county right-of-way, and Corinne Blakely had exactly as much authority over it as she had over the weather. Deacon didn't say a word to either man. He photographed the barriers with the county road marker in the frame, and the skid loader with its rental sticker visible, and the vests and the timestamp. Then he drove home, made coffee, and waited for 7 o'clock. The county road department answered at 7:02. By 8:40, a crew was out there. By 9:15, the barriers were gone, and Harrow Creek Estates had been issued an obstruction citation, with the association's name printed on the front and the president's name on the notice of violation. She had created a government record with her name on it the morning she most needed to be invisible. Gil Bellwether, meanwhile, had one honest moment left in him, and used it badly. He called Corinne Friday afternoon and asked the only question that mattered. Were these vehicles going to be sitting on association-controlled property? She told him they would be inside the community. Technically true, completely misleading. And when Gil asked for a signed property authorization from the landowner, which is the one document his own insurance required, she told him the association was the landowner and that she'd send it Monday with the invoice. He took the job anyway. 6 trucks, 8 drivers, 4 p.m. He would spend a long time explaining that decision. The instruction she gave him was precise. Not before 4. Wait until the ceremony starts. Wait until every guest is under the tent with their keys in a purse under a folding chair. Then come in, work the row nearest the gate first, and be gone before the vows finish. It was never about clearing a road. If she'd wanted them moved, she could have knocked on the tent pole at 3:30. She wanted 70 people to walk out of a wedding and find nothing. Deacon's morning was quiet. He pressed a shirt. He tied Otis's tie wrong twice, and Otis said something unrepeatable about it. Somebody's aunt put deviled eggs in the refrigerator at 9 a.m., and nobody knew whose they were. And out at the shaded end of the parking field under the oaks, Miss Verley Ferris polished the chrome on that Cadillac with a cloth diaper, because that's what her husband used, and she wasn't about to start doing it differently now. At 3:52, the guests were seated. At 4:02, Simone started down the aisle between the folding chairs, and Deacon Vaughn stopped thinking about property lines entirely. At 4:06 out at the road, air brakes hissed. Here is what Deacon did while 41 vehicles were taken off his land he got married. He had his back to the road. He said his vows in front of 70 people who were all looking the same direction he was. The band's guitar player heard something and turned around. And Otis caught his eye and shook his head once, and the man turned back. Behind them, 6 trucks worked the field in a rotation Gil Bellwether had clearly run before. Nearest the gate first, hook lift out. A Harrow Creek security guard stood at the fence with a clipboard, pointing out which ones to take, and in what order, working off a list of plates collected at a rehearsal dinner. They got the guest rentals. They got the caterer's box truck with 200 plated dinners inside it. They got the band's equipment van. They got a retired schoolteacher's Corolla and a 19-year-old cousin's first car. And at 4:31, second to last, they got the Cadillac. Every second of it went on to 4 cameras, and above all of it, in slow, patient circles, a 16-year-old's drone. The ceremony ended at 4:44. People clapped. Somebody's phone went off. And then 70 people turned around toward the parking field all at once, and the sound just stopped. Mode rose. Flattened grass. Not one vehicle. Otis was already running, and there is nothing in this world quite like watching a large man in a rented tux sprint across a hayfield. Deacon walked. He walked the whole 200 yards with Simone's hand in his, and when he got to the gate, the last thing he saw leaving was the Fleetwood on a flatbed, tail first, going up the county road, all that black chrome catching the 4:45 sun. Miss Verley stood at the fence and watched it go, and didn't make a sound. She didn't cry. She just watched. That was worse. Corinne Blakely was across the road in a white suit, 2 hired guards behind her, like an audience, and she was smiling. "Cute little ceremony," she said. "Somebody should have told you people this isn't that kind of neighborhood." She didn't hand Deacon the notice. She reached past him and tucked it into Simone's bouquet. And then she wiped her hand on her sleeve. Simone said quietly that every one of those vehicles had been parked on private property that belonged to her husband. Corinne gestured vaguely at the community sign down the road and said he'd brought an unauthorized event into her jurisdiction. That's when Sheriff Odell Rankin's truck came up the gravel. A guest had called the department at 4:09. And he got out, looked at the empty field for a long moment, and asked Corinne Blakely one question, in front of everybody. Had she personally authorized the removal of vehicles from Mr. Vaughn's parcel? "Every single one," she said, loudly, for the crowd. "And I'd do it again." Deacon asked her to say it one more time. She did. Louder. "Good," he said. Then he went back to the impound sheet in his hand and read down the list to the bottom. 40 entries he recognized. And one he didn't. A black Chevrolet Suburban. He turned to Nash Corrigan, standing 10 feet away in a suit he hated, and asked whether the Suburban was the fleet vehicle. Nash said it was. Drove it straight off an assignment that morning. Parked it with everybody else's. Corinne overheard enough to jump in and announced that she didn't care who owned it. The rule applied to every vehicle inside the community. What she did not know, which she had no way of knowing, was that the black Suburban wasn't a car. It was a registered federal asset. GSA tag on the doorframe tracked in a national inventory system, and it was now sitting behind a chain-link fence 26 miles away, in the custody of a private towing company nobody had cleared. Deacon stepped a few feet toward the fence and made a phone call. 9 seconds. Federal asset removed from private property. No authorization. He gave the location. 2 seconds of silence. Then 12 minutes ramps. He put the phone back in his jacket. Corinne, assuming he'd called a lawyer or an insurance company or his mother, turned to Gil Bellwether and told him to start hooking up the vendor tables and the rented generator too. "No more towing," Deacon said, and something in his voice had changed enough that Gil actually stopped moving. Corinne told him he didn't give orders in Harrow Creek. "I'm not giving an HOA order," Deacon said. Rankin, meanwhile, had walked 40 feet into the field and put his boot next to a fresh capped iron pin with an orange whisker on it, and asked Corinne whether she'd like to come look at where the line was. She said the vehicles constituted an emergency obstruction. Deacon pointed at the camera on the barn eave, then the one on the gate post, then the arch. Then he pointed up at a small white drone hovering 90 feet over all of them, and told her the last 3 hours existed in 4 angles, plus aerial, time-stamped, backed up off-site, and that there was no obstruction in a single frame of it. Her face didn't crack all at once. It went in pieces. She decided to leave. Told her guards to get moving, turned for her SUV, got a hand on the door. And a horn sounded from the far end of the road. A black Suburban came around the bend at maybe 15 miles an hour. Then a second. Then a third and a fourth, and they kept coming, spacing exact. No sirens at all. Just lights, red and blue, running silent against the late gold light on the hayfield. 14 federal vehicles took position around the property. 1 sealed the eastern gate. 2 sealed the western route out of the neighborhood. Nobody said a word to anybody. 70 wedding guests stood in a field in formal wear and watched a homeowners association president discover that she was at that moment the only person in Harrow Creek Estates who could not leave. The lead vehicle stopped at the gate. Deputy marshals got out in dark jackets with white letters across the back, and the man in front walked straight past Corinne Blakely, past her raised hand, past whatever she'd started to say, without acknowledging she existed, went directly to the groom, and said a title that nobody at that wedding had ever heard in their lives. Deputy Chief Vaughn. You could hear the whole yard go quiet. 9 years of waving over a fence, and the neighbors were finding out at the same time she was. Corinne demanded to know what was happening in front of her own residence. Deacon didn't answer her yet. He was looking at a tablet Nash had handed him, showing a federal asset number and a GPS ping steady inside the fence line at Bellwether Recovery, 26 miles away. Gil Bellwether made his decision fast. He handed Sheriff Rankin his phone, unasked, already scrolling. Take all of them, no exceptions. If anyone complains, tell them the board approved it. Rankin asked Gil directly whether Karen had ever produced a signed property authorization from the landowner. Long pause. No, sir, she said Monday. And that's when Roland Pettigrew came up the driveway on foot, in a jacket carrying a folder with block capital tabs, and handed it to the sheriff. The LLC registration, the invoices, the 22% referral clause, the affidavit sworn 6 days before the obstruction it described, and the 2-page letter of intent with Marrowbone Ridge committing an easement across Deacon Vaughn's field with a consulting fee payable to Blakely Property Compliance LLC and a deadline of September 30th. Rankin read the second page twice. Karen said she was calling her attorney. Deacon told her she absolutely should. She reached for her door handle again, and a deputy marshal asked her very politely to remain on the property until they'd established who ordered the removal of federal property. She said nobody could detain her over a parking dispute. This stopped being a parking dispute the moment federal property was transported without authorization, the marshal said, and stepped back. And Deacon Vaughn married 11 minutes standing in his own field in front of 70 guests. 2 agencies, a sheriff, and a 16-year-old's drone said the only thing he'd say to her all afternoon. You didn't tow 41 cars. He let it sit there the way she liked to. You towed 40 civilian vehicles off private land, 1 piece of federal property, and 1 road you'd already sold. Every vehicle came back within 90 minutes. No fees, no storage charges, no paperwork from a single guest. Bellwether's drivers brought them one at a time, and something strange and wonderful happened. The guests lined the driveway and applauded every single car. The Corolla, the band's van, somebody's minivan with a car seat in the back, 70 people in formal wear cheering a tow truck over and over for an hour and a half. The Cadillac came last. Gil Bellwether drove it himself, parked it under the oaks where it had been walked over to Miss Verlee, apologized directly, and left without waiting to be forgiven. Deacon didn't make a speech about it. He asked everybody to sit down so the reception could start. The caterer's truck came back with 200 dinners that were by then room temperature, and nobody cared even slightly. The band started shaky and found the rhythm by the second song. Deacon and Simone had their first dance under the string lights while a row of federal SUVs sat parked past the fence, and by then the guests had stopped noticing them entirely. The emergency board meeting was that night. Chairs pulled into a circle, residents standing in the doorway 3 deep. Karen tried to have Roland suspended for sharing internal communications before anybody could get to the rest of it, and the association's outside counsel arrived and asked her one question in front of the room. Did she own Blakely Property Compliance LLC, and had she ever disclosed it as the bylaws required? She refused to answer. Roland slid the state registration across the table. Nobody needed anything explained. The vote to suspend her was 6-1. The 1 was hers. The audit went back 9 years. Undisclosed payments, marked up contracts, vendor names that meant nothing to people skimming a budget. The board removed her entirely and canceled every contract connected to the LLC in a single week. Marrowbone Ridge's letter of intent died on its own deadline, September 30th, without anybody having to lift a finger. Karen was escorted out that evening for questioning about the towing orders, and the rest went through the ordinary machinery of the law slowly, the way it does for everybody. Deacon didn't touch any of it, not one phone call. When a colleague asked him why, he said if he'd leaned on it even once, then for the rest of his life, some part of the neighborhood would believe she'd been right about him. 3 months later, Harrow Creek held the largest resident meeting in its history, and Roland Pettigrew, president now, over his own strenuous objections, proposed the new bylaws. No contract with any entity owned by a board member without full public disclosure. No towing outside the recorded boundary. No fines beyond the plat. 3 competitive bids on everything. And every enforcement action must cite a section number in writing before $1 can be assessed. It passed with 4 abstentions and nothing against. Afterward, Roland asked Deacon to take a seat on the board. Deacon laughed at him. Roland said he'd had to ask so he could say he tried. Then Deacon did 2 things nobody asked him to do. He deeded a permanent public walking easement 30 feet along his fence line, recorded at the courthouse unrevocable, so the kids of Harrow Creek could get to the creek without walking the county road. 6 years of a woman demanding a road across his field, and in the end he gave one away for free to the only people who'd ever actually needed it. And Simone and Miss Verley took the wrongful tow settlement and started the Verley Ferris Trade Scholarship. 2 awards a year, local kids going into welding, HVAC, and nursing. The first 2 went to a girl from the apartments off the county road, and Sawyer Delacroix, who is going to be an aviation mechanic, and who still tells the drone story at every possible opportunity. That September, the neighborhood held a potluck in Deacon's Field. 60-some people folding tables, a smoker going all afternoon in the exact spot where 41 cars once disappeared. On the porch that fall, Simone found the photograph. The 2 of them under the arch mid-vow, exactly as planned, and behind them past the fence, an unmistakable line of black federal SUVs. "Most people get flowers back there," she said. Deacon looked at it a while. Then he closed the album, put his hand flat on the cover, and said the only thing he ever said about that afternoon. "She spent 6 years trying to get a road out of me. She spent 38 minutes making sure she'd never get anything." He looked out toward the gate, where the convoy had sealed both ends of the road. "She thought she was towing everybody out of our wedding. Never occurred to her she was the one who wasn't leaving." If you've got an HOA story of your own, a fine that made no sense, a letter with no rule attached to it, a board that forgot who they work for, put it in the comments. We read them. A lot of them end up here. And if you want more of these, subscribe. There's another one coming about a man whose HOA fined him $9,000 for a wheelchair ramp, and then found out who his daughter worked for. Something I keep coming back to about this one. 6 years. 6 years of $400 fines over a hay barn, a fence post, a flagpole. And every single person in that neighborhood, including Deacon Vaughn for most of it, thought they were watching a woman who just liked being in charge. She wasn't petty, she was patient. There's a difference, and it costs people a lot of money to learn it. That's the part that sits with me. Nobody in Harrow Creek was looking for a 2-page letter of intent with a September 30th deadline on it. They were looking at mailbox heights. And the whole time the fines weren't the point. The essence were the pressure. She was trying to buy a road one small humiliation at a time, and she'd already spent the money. What Deacon did honestly wasn't clever. He kept a spiral notebook in a kitchen drawer. He paid $9 for a plat. He asked for a section number in writing, and wrote down the date she wouldn't give him one. Boring stuff. Stuff anybody can do on a Tuesday. That's what beat her. Not a badge. $1,200 of survey stakes, and 6 years of somebody refusing to get loud. So let me ask you this, and I do want to know. Has your HOA ever fined you for something and never once told you which rule you broke? Did you ask? What happened when you did? Drop it below. If this one landed, hit like and subscribe if you want the next one, because there's always a next one. And here's the thing I'd leave you with. The clipboard was never the problem. Somebody handed her the clipboard, and then everybody stopped reading what she wrote on it.